Netflix, where Norm Macdonald had a secret special that he recorded before his passing that dropped last night on Netflix. And it's pretty unique because this is completely done without an audience. Just him talking into the camera, kind of like you and I are doing right now, but no one on the other end laughing or giving him any feedback. And it was really interesting to watch a stand-up performance this way. I have some thoughts about it, some moments that stood out, some that were maybe didn't work as well for me. But just overall, what was your experience hearing about this and then watching it?
Yeah, well, when I heard about it, I thought, "Oh wow, that is very interesting." Just for the sake that this exists, this nothing special final comedy special from Norm. That he died September of last year, and to get something like this, something as polished as he wanted it to be, out in existence in terms of a posthumous release, it feels very meaningful and rare. So definitely was excited just to see what it was, and then to also uh, grapple with it as a artifact of the pandemic. He made this in 2020, and he's literally talking to the webcam, as you say, out of necessity. And I think kind of like the double edged sword of the necessity being the pandemic, but also the necessity being his uh, descending personal health conditions that he was well aware of, and he felt compelled to create something even in this unrefined manner. So definitely interesting to think about, and it wasn't lost on me that on the day that this final special from Norm Macdonald comes out, Bo Burnham shares a 1 hour compilation of his inside outtakes that
Mm-hmm.
he had recorded. And of course, Bo Burnham's inside famous hit for this very same reason, a self-contained shot at home uh, special of one. But yeah, I mean, I'm not going to say I was the biggest Norm Macdonald fan. I think for the most part, his fame is just a little bit before my time, to be honest. I was really more aware of him just for his SNL exploits after the fact. Of course, he has a storied and quite varied comedy career. It's not like he was a hard stand-up special guy, even if he was a frequent comedy performer. But definitely interesting to get something like this out.
Yeah, definitely. And I think the thing that I was just most struck by is in if you watch on Netflix after the stand up finishes, there's
Mhm.
a group of his friends who are famous comic people: David Letterman, Adam Sandler, David Spade, Molly Shannon, Dave Chappelle, a couple of very
And
famous people.
Conan as well.
Yeah, and Conan, all sitting down and talking about their thoughts about the performance and just kind of Norm's life in general. And I just was struck by like how he was able to kind of work through this without any crowd reaction. It just was like he knew the beats. He was that like polished of a performer.
Yeah.
And then hearing, as a story from Adam Sandler where he was like an offhanded comment where he's like, I have like a solid 8 hours now. Like this guy was just like obviously a comedic genius, someone that was like professional's professional, one of a kind, and it really kind of makes you wonder like you watch this as basically like a Zoom comedy uh,
Yeah.
event, and you're like, some moments probably made you laugh, and some probably just felt totally flat. I wonder how it would have been with a live audience to like see how these landed. Was just kind of where I was left sitting with it.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think to his credit, and I think all his friends kind of chimed in on this and backed this up at the end. It seemed like there were definitely moments where he would kind of make offhanded references or modulate his voice or create fake distractions, whatever he could to kind of simulate the audience not being there,
Yeah.
or at least change up the pace and rhythm of comedy special, which is usually a bit more predictable and familiar when it's in front of a live audience, of course.
Were there any jokes from the special that really stood out to you, made you chuckle?
Yeah, there was a few that I did laugh about. I thought the comment about the life jackets versus just I don't know. I don't need to buy a boat. I can just get a fleet of sea cushions from the airplane. Made me laugh. The bit about the doctor and the knee hammer, that was pretty
Mhm.
funny. I think his most poignant comment, honestly, was about comedians being called modern day philosophers,
Yeah.
which is kind of this overdone thing people talk about stand-up comics whenever there's backlash or culture war comments, which is frequent these days, right?
Hmm.
And just to hear Norm kind of matter of factly being like, yeah, I mean, I wonder how that makes the actual philosophers feel.
Yeah.
They're figuring out their philosophy and be like, oh, so and so is supposed to be pretty funny. How about that?
Yeah, I really liked that as well. A couple of jokes that really stood out to me. I liked this one made me laugh the most when he was like, "My wife is so dumb." Do you guys know what a hall pass is? Like, we each get to pick one person we could sleep with. I said Angelina Jolie is mine. She chose the Mexican guy that mows our lawn. What an idiot! Like, I just was dying laughing. And of course, he has like classic Norm delivery that I could never mimic and replicate, but it's just so
Right.
perfectly said. And
I also, one of his friends at the end says that that was completely made up in the fact that he didn't have a wife by
yeah,
that name.
yeah. Um, and then I mean, a couple others that like stood out. Him talking at the beginning about like being a degenerate gambler and how they would pay him in chips, and sometimes they would break in half, like just like that, like stupid Norm Macdonald like mindset where it's like taking something and pulling it all the way to like the fourth degree, and you're just like lost even where it began at some point.
Right. What
Um,
was I talking about again?
yeah,
Yeah. Well, along those lines, I loved how he was like, I like to lose my money and I'm going to lose my money. I like to lose my money at Indian casinos. I'd like to pay my reparations to the Native Americans. I don't want to lose my money to the corporate people in Vegas.
oh man, and I also really liked what he was saying about racism. He was like the scuttlehead thing, where he's like, sometimes
Mm.
they say stuff that like, oh, those scuttleheads, and I look it up and I don't know what they're talking about, and no one knows, and sometimes you just get so lost in the sauce. I thought that was pretty funny, and also like two other lines like that really got me. I wanted to shout out the one where he was talking about like someone saying, "Hey, did you read my research paper?" And he's like, "I don't know how to break it to you. I have one life. I'm not going to spend it reading your research paper or
Yeah.
something like that." It's like my doctor said I
45
have one life,
pages.
so not going to happen. Just great. And then the guy who's like really really fat, who's like, "Could you believe at one point I was 185 pounds?" And he's like, "Yeah, I believe. I believe you're every weight up until you were 585 pounds." he
Yep.
just had like a way of things, and I thought Conan really summed it up well in the after thing, where he was like, Norm would start, he would plant a seed, and he'd walk you up the hill and around the barn, and you go all this way, and then you come back, and the seed has fully grown. You're like, oh, I totally forgot we even planted this seed by the time he's done telling the story, but it makes all these like jokes hit
Mhm.
so much harder. So, uh, it's sad to not get more Norm, but it's nice to have something like this as like a final goodbye.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we'll see exactly if this goes any further. But he does make a joke about the trans community or trans people in some fashion towards the very beginning. But I think it's how it differs than a lot of the more headline grabbing material more recently is that he's not doing it in like a mean spirited or like punching down kind of way. It's
Hmm.
more in the spirit of comedy that the comedy purists love to bandy about, but he's actually like doing that.
Hmm.
And it didn't come across as just like the blatant hack material that I feel like people argue about all the time these days. So that was kind of surprising. I think really not out of character for him, I suppose. But I was like, oh wow, we're getting trans stuff already. How's this gonna go? And I was like, oh, went better than I thought. Not too bad.
Yeah, definitely. Norm Macdonald, R.I.P. Definitely go check out this special if you're a comedy fan.